Greetings, friends. Kings and generals sometimes have to put people's backs up against the wall. And I don't mean the firing squad, although I suppose that could happen too. But what I mean is that they sometimes have to make a real and imminent threat to that which a person values the most. It could be their life, or it could be the life of someone dear to them. And now I have to say, I do not recommend that you threaten other people. But if you happen to be a ruler or a general, the unpleasant truth is that sometimes you have to threaten people. That's one reason I would never want that kind of job for myself. But it's still interesting for us to put ourselves in the shoes of the king, in the shoes of the general. So I'm going to share two pieces of ancient wisdom with you. First, I'll read the brief story called The Wisdom of Solomon in the first book of Kings from the King James Bible. I hope you don't have this, Bible allergy that some people have. But anyways, so if you can stick through that, this story is actually concerning the question of how a ruler should administer justice, and specifically how to know whether a woman is being sincere. So maybe other people who aren't religious will be interested in that too. But look, if you're willing to stick through that, I'm then going to read a few paragraphs that I've selected from another book which was written over 2,000 years ago, known as The Art of War. And this is a collection of military philosophy attributed to the Chinese general Sun Tzu. I think that's how you pronounce it, something like that. Though the book could have had other authors, of course. It's kind of hard to say. Sun Tzu is a bit mysterious. But I have read this very short book, and I do recommend it. Even if you have no intention of joining the army, the book does offer great life insights. Certainly, the ideas of Sun Tzu have attracted the attention of many business people. In this excerpt, which I've selected, it's not all together, but it's from the same chapter, he will tell us how to get men to fight with all their willpower. So some may question why I'm including these two different works of literature together in this video. Well, the common thread that I see is that which I've already described, the advantage a person of power can gain by putting people's backs against the wall. Though there may be different ways of doing that. It may be ugly, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. So without further ado, this is 1 Kings, or the first book of Kings, 3:16 to 3:28, the wisdom of Solomon. Then came there 2 women that were harlots, prostitutes, unto the king, and stood before him. And the one woman said, O my lord, I and this woman dwell in one house, and I was delivered of a child with her in the house. And it came to pass the 3rd day, after that I was delivered, that this woman was delivered also, and we were together. There was no stranger with us in the house, save we 2 in the house. And this woman's child died in the night, because she overlaid it. Now let me interject here. I'm not sure what they mean by overlaid, but maybe wrapping it too tightly, I don't know. But she's trying to say this other woman was irresponsible, and her son is dead because of her irresponsibility. Anyways, continuing. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me, while thine handmaid slept, and laid it in her bosom, and laid her dead child in my bosom. And when I rose in the morning to give my child suck, behold, it was dead. But when I had considered it in the morning, behold, it was not my son which I did bear. And the other woman said, Nay, but the living is my son, and the dead is thy son. And this said, No, but the dead is thy son, and the living is my son. Thus they spake before the king. Then said the king, The one saith, This is my son that liveth, and thy son is the dead. And the other saith, Nay, but thy son is the dead, and my son is the living. And the king said, Bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in 2, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then spake the woman whose the living child was unto the king, for her bowels yearned upon her son. And she said, O my lord, give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. But the other said, Let it be neither mine nor thine, but divide it. Then the king answered and said, "Give her the living child, and in no wise slay it. She is the mother thereof." And all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. So if it wasn't clear there, Solomon saw that the two women were claiming this child for themselves, and he basically says, well, I'm going to slice this child in half and give one half to you and one half to the other. And he did it as a psychological strategy to manipulate these women to see which one is being sincere or not. And the one, I guess you could argue whether a woman truly loves her infant or she does it out of this sort of selfishness. I mean, I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, but he knows that the mother, the true mother, whoever knows that it's her real son, is going to want to do anything she can for the best of her son. And in that case, she decides to give it up. We should rather lose the kid than see it dead, in which case he knows that she is the real mother. Okay, so if you stuck through that, let's get to Sun Tzu. So this is quotes that I've selected, some paragraphs I've selected from the chapter called 9 Grounds. And this is a very brief book. It's literally probably only 100 paragraphs, give or take. You know, paragraph doesn't have to be very long. Anyways, my favorite chapter in this book is chapter 11 with the title 9 Grounds. And this chapter 9 Grounds is my favorite. I think it's the most valuable chapter, not for knowing how to win an individual battle with an enemy, but I do think it's the best chapter for summarizing how to form your overall big picture strategy. Okay, so without further ado, this is Sun Tzu. And I mean, well, I guess I should say specifically these quotes are about how to get men to fight. So I know I was just saying this chapter is about your big picture strategy, describing geography and terrain and all that. But when it really comes down to it, comes down to deadly ground where men must fight. But we'll get to that. So to quote Sun Tzu, he says, quote, "Put them in a spot where they have no place to go, and they will die before fleeing. If they are to die there, what can they not do? Warriors exert their full strength. When warriors are in great danger, then they have no fear. When there is nowhere to go, they are firm. When they are deeply involved, they stick to it. If they have no choice, they will fight. When a leader establishes a goal with the troops, he is like one who climbs up to a high place and then tosses away the ladder. When a leader enters deeply into enemy territory with the troops, he brings out their potential. He has them burn the boats and destroy the pots, drives them like sheep, none knowing where they are going." Now let me interject here. What does Sun Tzu mean by burn the boats and destroy the pots? Well, to illustrate what he means, think of Alexander the Great crossing the Hellespont and landing in Persia in 334 before the Common Era. Now, Alexander ordered his entire flotilla, after having landed the men, to be burned before he went on to defeat the Persians. Or Hernan Cortés landing on the shores of Mexico in 1519 and then destroying his fleet. That action preceded his victory over the Aztec Empire. So he's saying there's no escape, there's no way back, you have no more boats, you have only one option, to continue forward or die. And destroy the pots, I guess that would mean like not be too overladen with equipment and basically forcing yourself to rely off the local populace. So here's more from Sun Tzu in the same chapter, 9 Grounds. He says, quote, "Generally, the way it is with invaders is that they unite when deep in enemy territory, but are prone to dissolve while on the fringes. When you leave your country and cross the border on a military operation, that is isolated ground. When it is accessible from all directions, it is trafficked ground. When penetration is deep, that is heavy ground. When penetration is shallow, that is light ground. When your back is to an impassable fastness and before you are narrow straits, that is surrounded ground. When there is nowhere to go, that is deadly ground. So, on a ground of dissolution, I would unify the minds of the troops. On light ground, I would have them keep in touch. On a ground of contention, I would have them follow up quickly. On an intersecting ground, I would be careful about defense. On a trafficked ground, I would make alliances firm. On heavy ground, I would ensure continuous supplies. On bad ground, I would urge them onward. On surrounded ground, I would close up the gaps. On deadly ground, I would indicate to them there is no surviving. So the psychology of soldiers is to resist when surrounded, fight when it cannot be avoided, and obey in extremes. And that's Sun Tzu. Let me interject here and let me repeat the second last sentence there. On deadly ground, I would indicate to them there is no surviving. On deadly ground, I would indicate to them there is no surviving. By the way, when Sun Tzu says to ensure supplies when you are deep in enemy territory, what he means is plundering the local populace. It makes sense. And that's all for now. Hasta luego, amigos.